Hello, beautiful homemakers. We are in Chapter 15 of the 1922 Fascinating Womanhood pamphlets. We've been talking about how women are on a pedestal and how you can fall off that pedestal. We talked about that last time. And today is the story of a stenographer. Stenographers used to take down letters in shorthand and then type it up. A certain stenographer employed in a large office was a good illustration of these principles that we discussed in the last video. As in many offices, the other girls were on a certain footing of familiarity with men, comrades and pals of the men, rather than creatures to be worshipped and placed upon a pedestal. Though this made them good company, it failed to contrast their femininity with the manliness of the men, and failed consequently in arousing any higher feeling than friendship between them. But this girl was different. Though she had a happy disposition and liked her associates, she would not make too familiar remarks to the men, and boisterously play with them at the cost of modesty, as the other girls sometimes did. When men would sometimes attempt to be over-familiar with her, she seemed so confused and dismayed that, although she never rebuked them outright, they felt ashamed of thus taking advantage of her innocence. I'm sure examples come to your mind that you have witnessed. The supper at the roof garden. Now this sort of conduct could not help but make the men believe that somehow here was a finer and more sensitive woman than the other girls. When a girl impresses a man in this way, with the fact that she is different, the man usually becomes interested. One of the men at the office showed his interest by asking her to the theater. After the theater, he took her for supper to a rooftop garden. Here, of course, she observed people drinking at some of the tables. Though she did not drink, she was secretly as delighted as a child to get a chance to observe these people. The happy crowd, too, was full of interest for her, and this sentence is in caps. The man with her naturally thought that she was wavering, that the contagious irresponsibility had affected her, and proceeded to wobble her pedestal. He was intensely interested, to tell the truth, in learning if she was the refined and idealistic woman she seemed. He proposed, therefore, that she have a mint julep herself, merely as an appetizer, of course. How she won out! The girl's eyes opened wide with astonishment and disappointment. She became frightened and started to rise from her chair. The man, quickly perceiving that he had made a mistake, made profuse and hurried apologies. Now, why did she get frightened? Because remember, darlings, this was the roaring 1920s, and flappers and women who drank or smoked were anathema to society. They were not accepted. We learned all about this in video FW 1.3. These women were not at all like what has been portrayed in our movies. During the remainder of the evening, he treated her with exceptional consideration, respect, and gentleness. The more brutal he felt himself for injuring her delicate feelings, the more exquisitely feminine and adorable he felt her to be. She responded to his apologies by accepting them as perfectly sincere and showing that she trusted absolutely in his chivalrous protection. So far as that man was concerned, she was on the pedestal and would stay there forever. Before the evening was over, he felt an interest in her he had never felt for any other girl. After that, he sought her society constantly. Often he would teasingly try to wobble her pedestal in little things which could not hurt her seriously. and would chuckle proudly to himself to see her cling with desperation to everything she thought right. There was a fascination for him in watching her act and react to every attempt to shake her idealism, and he was more proud of her unshakable determination to stay on top of the pedestal than he was of her confidence in him. Remember that a man who gets angry that you won't lower your standards and fall off of your pedestal is a man who is not in love with you. He is just selfish and wants his own way with you. A man who gets angry over high standards isn't worth having. He would make a lousy husband, so let him move on. Shall I tell you the story of the time I was at work and fell off my pedestal? I started at a firm when I was 19, and back in the 1990s, alcohol was very prevalent, and the majority of people in my department would go to a bar after work, especially on Fridays, and I never went. I was always invited, never went. But then in about 2002, I think it was, I got divorced from my first husband. And when I was invited to a company party, it was one of those things where you had to go, and of course the alcohol was flowing, I decided to try a daiquiri. And I remember catching the eye of a man I worked with, and he looked so disappointed. I was thinking, oh, I've never had a drink. I'll just try it. And catching the eye of this man, and he looked really disappointed. And I was like, why does he even care? It's because I had just fallen off my pedestal. I had worked with him for, at that point, like 13 years. And I just fell off my pedestal by accepting that alcoholic drink. Right? A lot of you are saying, oh, no big deal. But it was a big deal. I stood out because I always refused the alcohol. So this time I took only a few sips, and I quickly discovered why they say about alcohol, pick your poison. I could feel it run through my body, and it felt horrible. And I decided then and there to never have another drink. But then, like, I don't know, 6 months later, I met my future husband. He was raised in a family that enjoyed going on wine tours here in California, and this is what he had planned for one of our early dates. So he was quite surprised when I refused the wine at dinner, but he poured me a little and told me, just take a sip. Being 33 years old and wanting to please him, I did. I shouldn't have, but I did. I gave in to the pressure. I only had a sip, though, and I didn't like it. Yes, I didn't stay on my pedestal, because I didn't know then what I know now. And that's why I'm telling you, so that you don't make the same mistakes. We went out to dinner often during our year of dating. My favorite food is Italian, so we found our restaurant, and he eventually savored his own glass of wine without encouraging me to taste it. After staying on my pedestal and refusing over and over again, he stopped encouraging me to taste it. So when discussing marriage, I requested that his beer be kept in the garage and never in a refrigerator, and that we not keep any hard alcohol in the house ever. And he agreed. He had long ago given up all liquor except wine and an occasional beer. Then, several years later, I was at a very elegant lunch with two of my former coworkers, and they poured me a glass of wine and assured me that I would love it. Now, I knew I would be badgered until I tried it. So I took a small sip in order to keep things moving along and get the attention off of me. But guess what? I did love it. It was delicious. I wrote down the name, and when I came home, I told my husband that I had finally found a wine that I liked. And now that when we went out to dinner, I could join him in drinking a glass of wine. So at that time, our son was about 2 years old, and we rarely went out to dinner. However, on special occasions we would, and I was happy thinking that it would please him to have me join him for a glass of wine. Like, oh my gosh, I was going to be a real grown-up. I was going to drink wine. So it was shortly after this lunch experience that my wonderful husband decided that he did not want our son to be raised seeing wine and beer as a normal part of our life. So he made the decision to stop drinking both wine and beer, and to stop serving it in our home when guests came over, including to his parents. So next, my husband declared that we were no longer going to eat at places where the bar was visible, where drinking was glorified. So even at a place like Red Robin, while we would never drink there, we had to stop going there because the bar was visible, and my husband didn't want my son to see that as normal. It's practically impossible to get away from all restaurants that serve alcohol, but we have chosen restaurants where it's not the focal point. The bar is hidden at the back half of a restaurant instead of being front and center. And then we did discover a few restaurants where alcohol is never served. Recently, I asked my husband if he remembered the name of the wine that I had liked, because I sure didn't. And he rattled it off almost 2 decades later. So I asked him why, after all those early years of him wanting me to drink wine with him, he never bought it for me even once after I had found one that I liked. And he replied that he got used to the idea of me being a teetotaler, and he liked me best that way. It was just like these pamphlets say. He had put me on a pedestal in that regard. He liked me being pure from drink. He considered me angelic for being the only one at the table without an alcoholic drink. And because I was on that pedestal, it encouraged and enabled him to quit drinking completely when he realized that drinking wine made him feel unwell for hours afterwards. It would have been much harder for him to stop if I had been wanting my own glass of wine on weekends or at restaurants. Back in 2019, we took a trip to the state of Washington, and our bus driver mentioned that dozens of new wineries had opened up in the area because of Mount St. Helens volcanic ash making the land so fertile. And he commented on how many young people come up each weekend to sample the wine. My practical mom immediately asked if drunk driving had also gone up, and he replied that indeed it had. More wine equals more death. People are always using the Bible, especially 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 23, to justify drinking alcohol and to remind us that the Bible doesn't forbid it. They continue to satisfy their whetted appetites, and they become functioning alcoholics. They hold on to their jobs, but they can no longer feel peace in themselves if they don't have a glass of wine when they come home from work or with their dinner. So drinking wine is not a sin, but drunkenness is. And drunkenness is a process that begins within the very first minute of your first drink. It doesn't begin after drink number 2. Any alcohol consumed begins affecting your body and brain immediately. Your inhibitions and your judgment are degraded. So what does 1 Timothy 5:23 actually say? Don't drink only water. You ought to drink a little wine for the sake of your stomach, because you are sick so often. This wine in 1 Timothy was clearly for medicinal purposes. Remember, their water was impure. The wine purified the water, made it safe to drink. The same people that will bring up 1 Timothy 5:23 saying the Bible doesn't forbid wine would never bring up these verses from Proverbs 23, verses 29 through 35. Who has anguish? Who has sorrow? Who is always fighting? Who is always complaining? Who has unnecessary bruises? Who has bloodshot eyes? It is the one who spends long hours in the taverns trying out new drinks. Don't gaze at the wine, seeing how red it is, how it sparkles in the cup, how smoothly it goes down. For in the end, it bites like a poisonous snake. It stings like a viper. You will see hallucinations, and you will say crazy things. You will stagger like a sailor tossed at sea, clinging to a swaying mast. And you will say, "They hit me, but I didn't feel it. I didn't even know it when they beat me up. When will I wake up so I can look for another drink?" They also don't mention Proverbs 20, verse 1, which says, "Wine produces mockers. Alcohol leads to brawls. Those led astray by drink cannot be wise." Romans 13:13 says, "Because we belong to the day, we must live decent lives for all to see. Don't participate in the darkness of wild parties and drunkenness, or in sexual promiscuity and immoral living, or in quarreling and jealousy." Luke 21:34a says, "Watch out! Don't let your hearts be dulled by carousing and drunkenness and by the worries of this life." You won't spend the rest of your lives chasing your own desires, but you will be anxious to do the will of God. You have had enough in the past of the evil things that godless people enjoy, their immorality and lust, their feasting and drunkenness and wild parties, and their terrible worship of idols. Of course, your former friends are surprised when you no longer plunge into the flood of wild and destructive things they do. So they slander you. But remember that they will have to face God, who stands ready to judge everyone, both the living and the dead. That's from 1 Peter 4, verses 2 through 5. There are many more verses admonishing us not to drink alcohol, but I'll end with this exhortation from Ephesians 5, verses 3 through 20. "Let there be no sexual immorality, impurity, or greed among you. Such sins have no place among God's people. Obscene stories, foolish talk, coarse jokes, these are not for you. Instead, let there be thankfulness to God. You can be sure that no immoral, impure, or greedy person will inherit the kingdom of Christ and of God. For a greedy person is an idolater, worshiping the things of this world. Don't be fooled by those who try to excuse these sins, for the anger of God will fall on all who disobey him. Don't participate in the things these people do. For once you were full of darkness, but now you have light from the Lord. So live as people of light, for this light within you produces only what is good and right and true. Carefully determine what pleases the Lord. Take no part in the worthless deeds of evil and darkness. Instead, expose them. It is shameful even to talk about the things that ungodly people do in secret. But their evil intentions will be exposed when the light shines on them, for the light makes everything visible. This is why it is said, "Awake, O sleeper, rise up from the dead, and Christ will give you light." So be careful how you live. Don't live like fools, but like those who are wise. Make the most of every opportunity in these evil days. Don't act thoughtlessly, but understand what the Lord wants you to do. Don't be drunk with wine, because that will ruin your life. Instead, be filled with the Holy Spirit, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs among yourselves, and making music to the Lord in your hearts. And give thanks for everything to God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. That kind of sums up what these pamphlets teach about falling off your pedestal with drinking. Also remember that alcohol ages your skin. You can look on YouTube and watch a video about women who have given up alcohol and the positive effects it has on their life. Also remember that nothing good ever happens after midnight. Make sure you go to bed early. You are not missing out. I love this from Charlene Johnson from the book Beautiful Homemaking on pages 64 and 65. Remember that whatever it is that you want your child to be and say and do tomorrow, you must be and say and do today. Whatever your child sees and hears you do, that he has every right to do. It's not just what we say, it's how we say it. Our responsibility is overwhelming. Those were her words, by the way. And now for the story. A father decided to go off to the corner tavern on a cold, wintry Saturday afternoon. Slipping quietly from his house, he started down the snow-covered street toward his destination. He hadn't gone far before he heard a voice behind him. It was his 6-year-old son who said, "Go ahead, Daddy. I'm just following in your footsteps." But Daddy didn't go right ahead. The child's innocent remark took on great significance to that father. He turned to his son and tenderly picked him up in his strong arms and said, "Son, from this day forward, my footsteps will lead you to only the right places." And they went home together, a father and his son. You know, I am so thankful that my own father led us well. My father didn't drink at all. And I remember him telling me that when he retired, that they gave him a big retirement dinner, and the waiter came over to him and presented him with the wine to taste. My dad's friend saw my dad's hesitation and jumped in, and he tasted it and gave the waiter the okay. And being a teenager, I thought that my dad was going to tell me that he was embarrassed that his friend took charge. But no, my dad said, "I am so glad that I have never been tempted to drink." Not drinking is certainly no reason to be embarrassed. But teenagers think so foolishly. There was a woman named Skeet Savage, and she had a magazine called An Encouraging Word, and her last article before she went to heaven said, "So consider this. If others follow you along the path you are taking, do you know where you are leading them? If they imitate your life, will they be more like Jesus? If your friends and neighbors are seeking Jesus, will they find him as they walk along the way with you? Or will they only be more lost and confused as they trace your misguided footsteps?" So if you are a wine imbiber or a beer drinker or drink something even harder, your children will most likely follow in your footsteps. You know, there used to be a lot of ads for alcohol, and I'll try to put up an old ad for whiskey. And I want you to notice that only men are featured in these old alcohol ads, especially for hard drinks like whiskey, because women were on a pedestal. And what images does a mother drinking alcohol invoke? You immediately think of a slovenly woman, enslaved to drink, who has a messy house, who's mean to her children, who cusses, right? Women that drink alcohol are not attractive to men. They want you to drink it so that they can get you into bed. That's the only reason. So questions to ask yourself are, will my drinking today encourage my child to drink when he or she is of age? I remember an 8-year-old telling me that she couldn't wait to grow up. Why? So I can drink alcohol, smoke cigarettes, and get a tattoo like my mom. And that's exactly what she has grown up to do. Will your drinking today encourage your grandchild to drink? If you knew that your child, grandchild, or even great-grandchild would become a drunk driver and accidentally kill himself or kill herself, or would end up in jail for 25 years for killing someone else, would that help you quit drinking today? Because it happens every day. Will you help end the cycle of alcohol in your family line today by becoming a good example? I come from a long line of teetotalers on both sides. However, several generations ago, someone married a man who was an alcoholic. Was his dad an alcoholic too? This man was a churchgoer, but he was an occasional drinker as well. He ended up losing his first marriage, but went on to marry again, a sweet woman who died when I was very young. He had more children, and the boys followed in their father's alcoholic footsteps, as did their sons and daughters, and as did their sons and daughters. So the result in this present generation has been horrendous. The rejection of Christ, the rampant alcoholism, the devastation of marriages, and death. Our extended family has wondered if we could go back in time and tell that original man, that great-grandpa, that his great-grandchildren would die from alcohol, would he have been able to give it up for good? Contrast that with my other family lines, where the men in the family never drank. The children who decided to not drink then raised non-drinkers as well. But the children who decided to drink raised both drinkers and non-drinkers. Interestingly, all of the non-drinkers have had healthy marriages that survived, but the imbibers all ended up divorced. Yes, that is a simplification, but it's also a tell. Drunkenness directly contributes to fighting, ill health, and loss of financial stability. The choices we make today in how we raise our children and how we talk with them will directly affect how our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren will be raised. So what changes do you need to make right now? Maybe while you're still single. What traditions would you like to hear your great-grandchild tell about you? What would you like them to thank you for starting or ending? What would you be grieved to have them tell about you? You can begin anew today to become the storybook mother or grandmother or wife you desire to be. Let me end this video in the same way that I did my last one. People, especially women younger than you, are watching what you say, how you act, where you go, what you wear, what you do with your time, how you spend your money, if you get a tattoo, if you cuss, and even what you are drinking. Unbeknownst to you, whether for good or for bad, you are someone's role model. Someone is following in your footsteps. Where are you leading them? May God bless you as you lead people to Him by your example of feminine womanhood, fascinating womanhood, and biblical womanhood. Next time we'll talk about how to stay on your pedestal.